Okay. Welcome back. Jan Morgan here. I am talking with, hold on just a second. We have our next guest is Sheriff Chris Brown. And Sheriff Brown is the sheriff of Cleburne County, Arkansas. He's going to be making national news for darn sure, because he has actually decided to take a stand against red flag laws in a very bold way. Now you can see Chris in the background, but while I am reading this, I want you to listen to what he said. He called me several days ago and said he was going to do this, and I said, okay, if you're going to take a stand and say you're not going to enforce red flag law in your county, I want you to put it in writing. When you put it in writing, I'm going to tell everybody about it. So listen to this. This is Sheriff Brown. He says, I believe red flag laws could potentially be violations of our First, Second, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendment rights. And as sheriff, it is my duty and responsibility to stand in between the citizens of Cleburne County and unconstitutional overreach by any government. I strongly oppose red flag laws, and should they be passed by the state or federal government, I will take a hard look at the constitutionality of each statute before directing deputies to enforce them. To our law enforcement and military members, our oath, remember our oath. Remember that our loyalty lies to the people of this nation. To other sheriffs and chiefs, I urge you to stand up and make your voice heard, that we will not be the enforcement arm of unconstitutionality, that we will stand for what is right and stand in constant defense of our citizens, our nation, and our Constitution. Okay, so with me is Sheriff Brown right now. Sheriff, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Jan.
Good to be with us. I was going to try to call you on the phone and do the phone by the speaker, but it seems like we can hear you just fine. So, all right. What inspired you to step up and make this bold move?
Well, this is something here in Arkansas. We live in the natural state. We're very pro-gun here, and this is one of those things that I wasn't really sure that we would need to worry about at a state level. And then during this legislative session, they snuck one into committee, and I'm glad that it died there in committee. But it got me really realizing that this can happen anywhere. And Arkansas is not exempt from that, and so we need to make our voices heard and make sure that not only the public but our other elected officials, our politicians that legislate and make laws, know where law enforcement stands and where we as other elected officials stand as well. So the timing of it, we're past legislative session now here in Arkansas, and this is still a conversation at the national level, and it's time for some of us to stand up and say this is not the right way to go about this.
Well, when I talked with Senator Cotton on the radio, I was co-hosting another show, and talked to Senator Cotton a few weeks ago, and he said what it's looking like is that the federal government, rather than passing red flag laws because they're getting so much backlash, that they are looking at Senator Lindsey Graham's bill, which would actually incentivize state governments, hand it back to the states and incentivize state governments to pass on the state level red flag laws, and it would actually give them financial incentive to do so. And when you start talking about giving states money to enforce policies, the last time that happened here in Arkansas, we got Obamacare, which has been a disaster, a financial disaster for this state. So we're getting ready to hit a break. And when we come back from the break, I want to hear from you on how you feel about that possibility of it becoming a state issue and the states being incentivized to do that. Also, when you come back, we're going to discuss with you exactly what amendments in the Bill of Rights that red flag laws violate, and then from a law enforcement perspective, how that's going to be a difficult thing for you guys to have to enforce for those who try to enforce it. And I also want to talk to you about the Sheriff's Association, because I know that there are a lot of people in law enforcement that may not necessarily agree with you. And so we're going to talk about all that after this break. Stay with us, folks.
Very good.
So, this has been a pretty 3-minute break. Good. So we got 3 minutes to chat with you. So I may have to go back and ask some more questions. But are you getting a backlash? Are you feeling or hearing any backlash from other people in law enforcement for taking this stand?
not over this yet, and I expect there to be some after. We've got the letter scheduled to post about 7:50 this morning
Okay.
to my Facebook page, and so I expect some backlash for that. I can tell you, I've taken backlash for my stance on some things in the past. Back in March, we had a bill here in legislature that was talking about doing away with gun-free zones, which I'm very much for. And so we get an email, and we may have to discuss this again about Sheriff's Association, but they sent out an email asking where everybody stands on the bill. And I sent back, hey, I'm all for this. I'm for doing away with the gun-free zones. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And I start to get responses. It's like one big group email. So as other people start to respond, I was in D.C., and I was standing in George Washington's living room. And as I open up these responses, it's, I oppose this. I oppose this. This is not a good idea. I don't agree with this.
Why is it people in law enforcement feel that way? I don't understand. How is eliminating gun-free zones make us less safe?
I think it's the misconception of, this is exactly what I think it is. It's the misconception, or
as a business owner, if you want, but it cleared the way in some government buildings where people don't have to go disarmed or don't have to pay for a permission slip to carry.
Right.
So anyway, my whole position on that is any kind of restriction along those lines that require people to get a permit and take a class to pay for all that, it discriminates against financially disadvantaged people. Not everybody can afford to do that. And
it really makes it a privilege instead of a right.
Exactly. So we are coming back from the break. Sheriff, if you'll hold on just a second, I want to pause, and then we are going to be coming back on with all the radio stations as well. So just hang tight just a second, okay? Okay, welcome back. Jan Morgan here, filling in for Paul Harrell. Thank you so much for joining us at Conduit. And of course, I'm sure it will be the big story today and eventually probably be national news, as the other sheriffs, very few, but some are actually stepping up to the plate and saying, if the federal government or the state government passes red flag laws, I, as a sheriff, am not going to enforce those laws in my county. And a lot of people may not understand this, Sheriff, but in your county as a sheriff, and this is why I tell people, your sheriff election is the most important election you vote on, because the sheriff has more constitutional authority and power in his specific county or her county than the president of the United States.
Yeah. Absolutely, and it's as a sheriff. I mean, it's why sheriff's elections are so important. Why you have to know who you're voting for and where they stand. But as the sheriff, we're the last line of defense between overreach and our citizens. It's our responsibility and our duty to uphold the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the state of Arkansas, to make sure that the rights of our citizens are protected. And that key protection there for us is a huge thing.
Right. Well, you swore to uphold the Constitution, and the red flag laws, all of them that I've seen, whether you call it red flag, extreme risk protection order, or gun violence restraining order in some states is what they call it. Regardless, I have yet to see one that does not violate the First, Second, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendment rights of the people. So, and in addition to that, as someone in law enforcement, doesn't it put your officers in particular in more dangerous situations when we're talking about going into people's homes and confiscating their guns?
Absolutely. And you've already seen one instance of that in Maryland, and that was last year, 1 month after Maryland passed their red flag law. They get a petition. The police go and they knock on this guy's door at 5:30 in the morning. He opens it with a gun, as most of us, especially here in Arkansas, would at 5:30 in the morning. The police say, well, look, hey, this is what we're here for. And as soon as they say, we're here to take all your guns from you, a struggle ensues and they kill him. But that could have just as easily been a death the other direction. It is obviously neither of those deaths are a good thing. And it is, I think, even more multiplied in a state where, in a rural county in Arkansas, which is what Cleburne County is, everybody has a gun. We deal, I dare say that we deal with more guns in law enforcement in Cleburne County than I did working for two different municipalities that were much larger. because again, it's a rural county. Everybody owns a gun, and everybody travels with a gun, and so almost everybody you deal with is armed, which is a good thing. But it is, if we start trying to step in and take those, even with a court order, it's not going to end well. It's going to be very dangerous.
So what do other sheriffs say to you? What is their excuse for not wanting to uphold the Constitution and actually support and enforce red flag laws? What is their excuse for not taking the stand that you're taking?
I think the biggest issue that we face, and I don't know that it's necessarily specific to sheriffs, but the biggest issue that our politicians use, that a lot of times our general public uses, certainly the left uses it, is the assumption that the police will arrive in time to save you. And if you operate with that as a baseline, then in your mind you can justify saying, well, the police are the only ones that really need to have guns. The general public doesn't need to carry them around because that is what we are for. Well, the truth is we're really good at picking up the pieces afterward. We're really good at investigating cases. We're really good at preventing crime sometimes exactly where we are. But that there are not enough of us to go around. Not everybody can carry a pocket cop. And so you as a citizen have to be your first line of defense. And I think maybe that's where some of the contention starts, or the not wanting to step out and say, this is exactly where I stand. Of course, the other part of that too is when you take a hard stand like that, you open yourself up to widespread criticism. And I personally don't like being criticized, and I don't think anybody else does either. But there comes a point where we have to put that aside and say, right is right, wrong is wrong. This is where I stand. Like it or leave it.
Do you find that most people in law enforcement, whether it be city police or sheriff's agencies, in general, want responsibly armed citizens to be carrying guns?
Widely, yes, absolutely. Most law enforcement that like I said, I've worked for 4 different agencies. Most of the guys and gals that I have worked with are vastly for the Second Amendment. They're very pro Second Amendment. They're very pro citizens carrying guns. They're obviously not pro criminals carrying guns, but they're pro regular law abiding folks carrying guns.
But here's where I think that there is a problem. They may be for responsibly armed citizens carrying guns, but are they for the Second Amendment? Do they understand that it is a right, not a government issued privilege? Therein lies the whole issue. I even talked to my own sheriff about that here. We've had several discussions about it because, and I've talked to a number of people in law enforcement, and they seem to be of the impression, well, shouldn't we get people trained? Shouldn't we require people to be trained if they're going to carry a gun? Don't we only want people carrying guns who are not felons and are not mentally ill? And well, of course we want people to, but the fact is we don't get to decide that because it is a right, not a privilege. And rights, as you know, and for those of you watching in the audience, if you don't get anything else out of this entire discussion today, I hope you'll remember this. Rights are inalienable. It's something you're born with. A government agency can't give you a right if you were born with it. That's why our founding fathers very specifically used the word right when they were talking about the right to due process, the right to not be subject to unreasonable search and seizure, the right to keep and bear arms, the right to freedom of speech. They're listed as rights, not government issued privileges. And so if a government can't give you a right, then a government can't regulate or restrict a right. And I think that's where we have this whole divide, this big line between those of us. How much time do we have, Reggie? 10 minutes. Good. Okay. So the big divide between how much law enforcement actually understands regarding a right versus a privilege. But anyway, just some last words from you on this issue, and then I'm going to bring in another one of our guests who is from our local county sheriff's department. So, and you're welcome to stay on board and pipe in on that conversation as well. But final thoughts on this, what do you expect to happen today now that you've come out publicly and taken this very bold stance against it today?
I think there's probably going to be some wide varying opinions, but probably the biggest thing that you have stressed and that I can stress to all citizens, but specifically to law enforcement and to our military is we took an oath to uphold these rights, and we are bound by that oath, and we have a duty to do that, to follow through on that, to uphold that. And if you say it can't happen, you can look at post-Hurricane Katrina, when the military was used to take weapons, knock doors over and take guns out of people's houses. The big push for a long time has been to try and turn really the opinion or the idea that these rights that we have are granted by God, and turn them into, the Constitution is a government document written to the people saying that we're giving you these rights, when in reality, the Constitution was written by the people aimed at the government, saying these are our rights, they are given to us by God, they're inalienable, and you cannot mess with them. And if you can just simply change that,
change that perception.
you make it a privilege.
Well, we're trying to educate. Listen, I want you to please welcome our next guest, Jason Lawrence. Jason, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Jason is the undersheriff for the Garland County Sheriff's Department.
Correct.
And you've got quite an extensive background. You've been through the FBI National Academy,
I have,
right?
yes, ma'am. Just recently graduated. Came back at the end of March of this year, ma'am.
I saw the picture. So good. Congratulations
Thank you,
on
ma'am.
that.
Appreciate it.
So let's talk about the whole mental health issue.
Sure.
Because that is, when you talk to people in law enforcement, the ones that I've discussed this with, who say, well, we've got to do something. We have to deal with mentally ill people. So how big of an issue is the mental health problem regarding what you all do as law enforcement officers, Jason?
Well, it's something that we face every day. The number of calls for mental health, and I would assume it's the same for you, Sheriff, in your county. The number of those suffering from a mental illness or suicide threats, those numbers have gone up increasingly since 2015 when I came in with Sheriff Mike McCormick.
Mm-hmm.
So the issue is, what do you do with them?
Right.
They don't need to be in your detention center. Sheriff, you would agree.
Absolutely.
Your detention center, I doubt you have a jail that is empty and ready to be filled up at any time.
No,
we don't need to put them there. If they commit a crime, they need to go to jail.
Mm-hmm.
But what do we do with them? So that's the purpose of crisis intervention training and crisis stabilization units. Get those individuals to a treatment facility to get them the treatment they need.
We don't have enough stabilization
No,
units.
ma'am. We don't.
Tell me if I'm right on this, because I had heard when I was on the campaign trail,
right.
people,
You're always right.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you for acknowledging that.
Well, I do what I can.
That's what I say. But when I was on the campaign trail and I was listening to people in law enforcement, talking to people, they were saying that one of the biggest problems they have is when you take mentally ill people off the streets, there's nowhere to put them, that the few stabilization units we have are always full.
Well, and I don't know about necessarily always full.
We don't have them in every county.
No, ma'am, we don't. For example, the closest one we have for Garland County, Hot Springs, is going to be Little Rock. So they have 16 beds available. For
only
us,
16?
yeah,
That's it?
Yes, ma'am. Only 16 beds available. The issue that we have is, for example, once you determine someone is suffering from mental illness and you're able to convince them, because once again, state of Arkansas, it's voluntary to go. It's going to be an hour to 2 hours before that deputy is back. Mm-hmm. So for us, and once again, Sheriff, I keep picking on you, but you know how it is. We have a lot of ground that we have to cover. We're not like a city. So for us, we're in a position that we have 700 square miles, population of 98,000. We take that deputy and they're going to be gone for 2 hours. That means that deputy's not going to be here. So that's something that we would like to see locally, is a crisis stabilization unit to get individuals the help they need.
How likely is that to happen?
Ma'am, that depends on the government, and you know how the government works. No offense. It's a money deal, and I get it. Nobody wants to pay more taxes. Nobody wants to be in a position where they have to pay more money. But we've got to do something on our local levels. Get the individuals the help they need.
Well, now you all recently, and I say you all, there was a big commission meeting of civic leaders, people in law enforcement, people in education. You all just recently had a big meeting here in Hot Springs because we had, a couple of shootings in the downtown area.
Yes, ma'am.
You actually had to take out a guy who pulled a shotgun.
Yes, ma'am.
Walking down the street. He was mentally ill. He'd been arrested or taken in, I'd heard multiple times.
He was, yes, ma'am.
And so people here are very concerned about it. And what came out of that brainstorming session of leaders?
The purpose was, once again, Chief of Police Jason Stacy wanted to bring a group of individuals in and say, we need to do something. And I completely agree. We need to do something to address the issues of violence. Violence has always been here. The issue is we have a new generation, once again, and I'm a parent of 3 kids, a new generation that's committing more acts of violence. And what is the core root? It's not guns, ma'am.
Thank you.
It's not.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I will tell you, it's not.
That's right.
I use the term a lot, active aggressors, because it's not a gun. It could be a bat. It could be a car. It could be anything. We have to be in a position. Sorry, I didn't mean to go off on that tangent. We have to be in a position that we treat the root causes. Just recently, there was a study that came out, and I talked about it, called the Violence Project. And I have not read it in completion, but just some general information in regards to it. They actually looked at all the shootings since 1966. From 1966 to current, all those shooting instances, 4 or more that were killed, those individuals had a couple of things in common. Parental suicide or threats of suicide, domestic violence, abuse, and had bullying. Now, I'm very important to say this. Those things by themselves doesn't mean someone's going to do it. Being mentally ill doesn't mean you're going to be violent.
Right.
But those are all causes. So how do we treat that root cause? The issue that this study did, which was fascinating, they looked at 200 instances that did not occur, that we stopped. We stopped as a community. We stopped as public, as parents, as law enforcement.
But you didn't stop it by confiscating someone's
No,
guns.
ma'am. No, not that.
How did you stop it?
Intervention, ma'am.
Intervention.
By addressing that from at a very young age.
Because, at a very young age, but also we have laws on the books in the state of Arkansas. Do we not have laws that allow you all to go in when there is a potential, someone who has mental issues and deal with it without confiscating their guns and taking all the guns out of the home?
Well, and this is probably the biggest issue that I see in regards to the red flag laws or those other things in regards to it. Where is the data that they work? And I believe in looking at all the data.
There is no data that it works.
That's my point. Where's the data? Is it working? Is it not working? Or are there other factors in regards to it? You need to address a root cause instead of having a knee-jerk reaction in regards to it. That's just my opinion in regards to it. I do not speak on behalf of Sheriff Mike McCormick or the Garland County Sheriff, but on this issue specifically, where is it? We have to treat a root cause, which is at a young age. We have to do something and to help those struggling with abuse, bullying, suicide, and domestic violence at a young age so we can raise a better generation.
And what is that something?
It's everything. It's everything from putting things in schools and programs in schools, teaching local law enforcement, working with schools, our school resource officers, all those things, giving the resources needed for for those suffering from mental illness. Let's put money in treating those individuals at your local level.
Something that I think is extremely unfortunate is that you mentioned earlier, you all have to, when you get to the scene of a situation, you have to assess if someone is mentally ill.
Yes, ma'am.
Since when have you're not a psychologist?
Yes, ma'am.
So you're a law enforcement officer. You're trained to go in and protect people and save lives. You don't go and make decisions about psychological issues.
We don't. But the thing is, law enforcement is adapted, and for the good. I will say that we do a lot more. I made the comment yesterday. A law enforcement officer has to be like a marriage counselor, has to be a referee, has to be a lawyer, and sometimes we got to be a car salesman. And you convince those individuals that are struggling at this point to get in that ambulance to go get help. The issue is once they go to a local hospital and then they're treated and released. And what happens 1, 2, 3 days later, and you're taking that same call again.
Exactly, which is what happened with the gentleman downtown.
Yes, ma'am.
In Hot Springs, which was very scary. So out of that big commission meeting and all of those brainstorming that was taking place at that meeting here in Hot Springs, was there any kind of push for gun control measures in our city? I
never heard anything in regards to that. I didn't. And as I will tell you once again, that is not the answer.
Okay. That
is 100%, in my opinion, not the answer in regards to it. We don't need that.
Okay, good. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jason. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Congratulations on the FBI Academy and going through that. And we'd love to have you back on sometime.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Good to see you, Sheriff.
You too. Thank you.
All right, we are running out of time. We're hitting up on a hard break. Thank you, folks, so much for joining us today. I thought we had a great show. Enjoyed all of the guests. Thank you, Sheriff Brown, for taking your stand. And we're going to be staying in touch with you to make sure that things go well for you and to keep on top of that. So stay in touch with us, Sheriff. Thank you all for listening out in Facebook land and Conduit News, the #1 source for conservative news in the state of Arkansas. Thank you so much for joining us, Paul Harrell. Hope you have a great vacation. And I believe Hannah Webb is going to be filling in for the next couple of days. And for everyone else out there, have a great holiday weekend. We'll be seeing you around. Awesome. Yeah, we're in a 3-minute break again. So, I I was thinking we were done, but this is good. So we've got more time. Let me pull you back up, and as soon as this break is over, we're going to let some people ask some questions as well. Let's go into the thread and look at what people are saying. Yeah. Oh, just thought you. How about this, Sheriff? I don't know if you can see what's on the screen. It says we need 70 Sheriff Browns in Arkansas. Yes, we have 75 counties, so we need 75. Yes. Trudy says, great show, Jan. Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Great dialogue. That's coming from John Q. I forgot what state John is. I think maybe he's in Arkansas. Yeah, everybody keeps saying that. Look at here. There's more. We need 70 more Sheriff Browns. Yeah, early prevention saves lives. Yeah, Maria Turner says prevention is a big plus, but our politicians do not want to allocate money to prevention programs. Yeah, that's the truth. So, it's going to be interesting, Chris, to see what kind of strings are attached to that money that's coming down from the feds. So
there's always strings attached.
Yeah, always. And I'm wondering what if they just said, okay, we're going to, what if your state government said, okay, we're going to take this money, but we're only going to use it for stabilization units, mental stabilization units. Would you be for that?
I think the stabilization units are actually a good thing. We only have plans for 4 right now. And they're going to try and expand at some point, but Cleburne County is not even inside of a catchment area. So as of right now, if we get somebody that qualifies to go or that we think needs to go to that, we don't have a place to take them. Mm-hmm. And so I think
what do you do with them?
We do what we've always done with them. If we can talk them into going to the hospital and then talk them into being voluntarily committed, we'll do that. And we actually had one here last month or the month before. We called 5 different facilities, and 4 of them turned them down. The first 4 we called turned them down, and the 5th one finally said, "Yeah, we'll go ahead and take them." And when we do that, we got to drive them an hour, hour and a half, 2, 3 hours away. But they're able to refuse them, and so if we don't, we wound up sitting at the hospital with that guy for 5 or 6 hours before we finally found a facility to take him. And at any point during that, if he just decides, I don't want to go, you just get up and walk out of the hospital.
Yeah.
And that's not good. I mean, it's not an effective way to help.
Well, yeah, and I can't imagine your agency. How large is your agency?
We have people that carry guns. We have 26 enforcement officers. Mm-hmm. 17 of those are on patrol, and then the rest spread out through investigations, court, and everything else. So
taking somebody off the street for hours to wait and sit in the hospital waiting for somebody to see if you can get help for someone with mental illness you've got some crimes occurring out on the streets. That's terrible. Right. Amazing. Okay, so we are getting ready to come back from the break, and we'll just have Chris. When we come back, we'll have probably about a few minutes. Welcome back. Jan Morgan here, filling in for Paul Harrell. We're in the final segment of Conduit News, the Paul Harrell program. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you are just now coming on board with us, I am talking with Cleburne County, Arkansas Sheriff Chris Brown. And Chris we broke the story last night here at Conduit. And of course, now it's going to be the big story of the day in statewide news. And I expect it to become a national story, because here's what Sheriff Brown has said. He has said that he is not going to enforce red flag laws in his county unless there is such a thing as a red flag law that does not violate the 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendment rights of the people. So, Sheriff, you told me that you actually had a discussion with our Attorney General about this when they first started talking about red flag laws, and that your feeling was that you weren't going to enforce it. What was her response to that?
I think it was an interesting response, and I don't know. I caught her after a meeting, and so it was kind of one of those conversations that happened off to the side in just a couple of minutes, and she may not have wanted to have an entire conversation, but it was her response basically was, we got to look and see what that law looks like, and but if a judge signs off on it, then I may be okay with it, and everybody's entitled to their own opinion. I don't agree with that opinion. I think even if a judge signs off on it, that doesn't necessarily mean that due process has been followed or given. And so I think there's a lot more things to look into there, with that than just whether or not a judge signs off on it.
So she didn't look at you and say, "You're crazy. You're going to lose your job." She didn't say anything. She just, but kind of, it was sort of a neutral position, is what you kind of felt at that time, right?
It was, and that's one of those things. This issue is a really, really broad and complex issue, and it's sometimes it can be hard to give an answer in 30 seconds why you're for or against it, or why you stand where you stand. So, if it comes down at some point, I hope she comes out on the same side that I've come out on, and we'll just kind of see if and when that happens.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I am going to tonight. We are going to sit and break down the whole red flag law issue, and I'm hoping you're going to join me for that discussion. Yes, you are. Good.
Absolutely.
Probably around 7. I will post a time later today on my Facebook page, but we're going to really sit down and break down how it actually violates, red flag laws violate each specific amendment right. Okay. We're going to break it down for you so that when I'm talking to you, all the folks out there watching us on Facebook land and all the folks listening on radio, so you'll actually be able to have intelligent discussions with your friends who support red flag laws. Because, Chris, I want to know when people in your community say to you, because as a sheriff, when you stand up and say, "I'm not going to enforce this," I know that you're going to hear from people in your community who are going to say this, and I want to hear your response to this. Well, don't you want to keep guns out of the hands of mentally ill people?
And the answer there is we all do. We all want to make sure that people who really don't need to have guns don't have access to them. But at the end of the day, this isn't a gun issue. These mass killings are not a gun issue. It's a people issue. And the left and other people have pushed so hard to say that this is a gun issue, when it's not. It's as a society, we've moved away from God. We've taken God out of everything that we do. And when you do that, you take away value of life, you take away the respect for authority, and you devalue human life to the point that anybody who has even an issue of some kind or something like that, like Undersheriff said, not every person that has a mental handicap or illness is capable of doing this, but certainly there are some people, mental illness or not, that are disposed to this. And when you devalue human life like we have, and you take God out of everything that we have, you make that a lot easier to make that decision. And it doesn't matter if they don't have a gun. There was an Illinois man that had guns taken away from him twice, that killed his mother with a sword. So, it's not a gun issue, it's a people issue. And we need to address the correct cause here.
Okay, Sheriff, we are coming up on a hard break toward the end of the show. I really appreciate you joining me. For everybody watching us out on Facebook, and for those of you listening on the radio, come to my Facebook page tonight. We will be going into much more in-depth discussion of red flag laws tonight. Thank you, Sheriff, for taking that stand, and keep us posted on how things go. All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, folks, for joining us. Paul Harrell will be back next week. Hannah Webb will be filling in for the next couple of days. Thank you for joining us, and you have a great holiday weekend.